So this is the session that walks through the full environmental review process for CDBG projects. So we'll highlight key steps, roles, and documentation. And so whether your project is large or small, this process ensures that we're all complying with NEPA and HUD requirements. So NEPA is the foundation of our process for environmental review. So even if your project doesn't need a full review, it still has to be evaluated and documented. So that documentation, the environmental review record, or as we like to call it, the ERR, is your proof of compliance with all applicable laws. So overall, if it's a sidewalk replacement, a roof repair, or even a planning study, all these projects still need to be reviewed. So the level of review might be different, but the requirement to document applies across the board. So just a quick reminder, your ERR should describe every project activity, including the environmental impact analysis. So it's the official record, and it must be kept updated and accessible to everyone. If anyone should ask you for it, you should be able to provide every single piece of paper that you have. And it should tell the full story of what you're doing. So what you considered and how you addressed any environmental risk for the project. So here's an overview of the 8 steps that we'll be covering today. So it goes from defining your project scope to ultimately receiving that environmental clearance. So these are key milestones throughout the process. So step 1 is project aggregation. So we start by aggregating all related project activities regardless of the funding source. So this just ensures that you're reviewing the full impact of the project. So if the activities are unrelated, like a rehab and a buyout, separate reviews may be appropriate. So for example, say your project includes a sidewalk improvement with CDBG funds and a water line replacement funded by ARPA. So even though the water line isn't specifically funded by CDBG, it's part of the same construction effort, so we must review the entire process all together in the same environmental review. And then don't just think about immediate impacts. So direct impacts happen on site and during construction, but indirect impacts like increased traffic or drainage issues must be considered too. So if it's reasonably foreseeable, it should be evaluated. So for example, replacing a culvert may cause downstream flooding during storms, so that's an indirect impact. Or rehabbing a building might increase traffic or parking needs. So these need to be considered if your impact analysis, even if they don't seem obvious at first. Step 2 is environmental review responsibilities. So you'll need to designate 3 key roles. So your responsible entity, that's usually your city or your county, the environmental preparer, that could be like grant admin, an engineer, people like that, and then your certifying officer, which is your highest elected official. So that's usually the mayor or the presiding commissioner who must sign for all findings. It's also important to take the responsible entity role seriously. So if like a grouchy community member or an environmental org pursues litigation, or if HUD audits the project, the responsible entity is liable for the accuracy of the review, not DED. So that's just a good thing to remember, that whenever you're filling out the paperwork, doing all that type of stuff, you want to make sure that you're really like being diligent and careful, because at the end of the day, we can help you with this and we like help do like provide guidance, but you're ultimately responsible. So step 3 is determine the level of review. So this is where you classify the project. The level of review depends on what kind of work is being done, not just how much funding that there is. So options range from exempt to environmental impact statement. And you can think of it like a flow chart like we have here. So if it's admin work, it's probably exempt. And if it involves acquisition or minor rehab, it may be a CEST, which is category excluded subject to. And if you're building a new facility, you're likely looking at an environmental assessment. So this is basically just a flow chart of everything that the different levels of review of what you'll need. but we're going to walk through common examples of what qualifies under each review level so you can match your project correctly. So exempt projects don't involve physical changes. So these are things like planning, administrative work, or studies. So they still need requirement documentation, but you don't need a public notice or a comment period for these things. So think of a project where a city is using CDBG funds to update its 5-year plan, or paying staff to attend different types of like training or work. So no construction is happening, so these would be exempt activities. So a category exclusion not subject to, or a CNST, applies to supportive activities. So these are like rental assistance, down payment services. So they aren't subject to full NEPA review, but you still need to screen for other federal laws. So let's say your community offers a $5,000 in down payment assistance to first-time home buyers. So this is a CNST activity. So it doesn't change the environment, but it still will trigger 58.6 laws like flood insurance and airport zones. And then next we have exempt and CNST review requirements. So even for exempt and CNST reviews, you still need to check for flood hazards, airport zones, and other compliances under 24 CFR 58.6. So these requirements don't go away just because your project seems low impact. So for example, if a home buyer is purchasing a house in the 100-year floodplain, flood insurance would be provided. Next is category exclusion subject to, or CEST. So this covers work like major or minor rehab, barrier removal, or acquisition. So if the project doesn't require mitigation, you may be able to convert it to an exempt project. You'll need more documentation here, including like an engineering or architectural report. So a good example is when a community replaces windows in a low-income senior housing. So if it's a basic one-for-one replacement and no significant impact is expected, a CEST, and like I said before, may even convert to exempt if all conditions are met. So EAs, or environmental assessments, are for larger and more complex projects. These are basically the ones we see most with CDBG. So these are like new public buildings, significant rehabs, or land use changes. And they often require a formal environmental assessment that usually will end up in a finding of no significant impact, or their FONSI. So does anyone have an example of what an EA could be? Anyone? No? Well, pretty much. So if your town is building like a new library or is converting a warehouse into apartments, you'll need an environmental assessment. So these kind of projects require more scrutiny to things like traffic, noise, and historic preservation. And then we have an environmental impact statement, or EIS. So this is the most intensive level, and we really don't do these with CDBG, but you never know, one may come up. So it's required if your project affects more than 2,500 housing units, creates significant noise, or causes extraordinary environmental concerns. These are very rare, but it must be handled really carefully. Next, we have conditions of approval. So sometimes projects are only approved with specific conditions. So these are like limited construction hours or dust control. So these conditions should be documented and shared with project stakeholders to ensure compliance. So say you're installing a new like HVAC unit, but the building is in a historical district, a condition might be using like non-invasive installation methods, or selecting equipment that doesn't alter the building's historic facade. So if any section of the review determines something other than no effect, you must have some kind of mitigation for that impact recorded in the conditions of approval. And if you ever need help with like doing conditions of approval, we do have like templates and stuff of like commonly used ones that we can always like send you, or just like walk you through the process. Next, we have special circumstances. So one of these are tier reviewed. So tier reviews are useful when you don't know the specific sites. So common in scattered site projects. So tiered 1 covers the broad scope, and tier 2 reviews each location as it's identified. So for example, a housing rehab program in which you don't know yet which 15 homes will participate is a great use for a tiered review. So you handle the big picture issues in tier 1, like general floodplain risk, and individual property specifics in tier 2. So tier 1 defines your overall project area and anticipated activities. So you'll publish a public notice and complete a broad level review to identify what issues need more site-specific attention later. So tier 1 defines your project area and what kind of work is expected, like installing energy efficient windows in an older neighborhood. So this sets the framework for the individual site evaluations later in time. So tier 2 happens whenever you know the exact site. So you only need to republish if the site introduces a new or unaddressed impact for the tier 2. So for example, if one site turns out to be near a hazardous facility or in a floodway, issues not covered in that level 1 tier 1 review, then you'll need to evaluate those specifically and maybe even republish a notice. So otherwise, just complete the sections that the tier 1 deferred to. So you aren't required to receive DED approval for tier 2 reviews, but they must be locally documented. Step 4 is the environmental review packet completion. So each level of review has a different packet, so make sure you're using the right one and that it's complete. So incomplete packets are one of the most common causes of delay in our office. And if you're ever kind of confused of what your project is, what level that is, or if you can't find a packet, just let us know and we could work you through it. Yeah. Step 5 is publication and posting. So a CEST and an EA reviews require a public notice. For a CEST, it's 7 days, and for an EA, it's 15. So if you're posting instead of publishing, you can add 3 days onto that, but just make sure to follow these timelines carefully. Step 6 is completion of the RROF/C form and the affidavit of publications. So after the comment period has ended, you'll submit your request to release of funds, or the RROF, along with proof of publication, the distribution records, and any other required documentation. So this could be like all your signatures for your packets and things like that. So this is going to start the next 15-day objection period for like state and HUD. So step 7 is that state objection period. So that begins the day after we receive your full RROF package. So no funds can be drawn down or physical work started until that 15-day period is over and we've given you the AUGF. And this is just a quick reminder. So make sure that your comment periods are calculated correctly. So we've seen project delays just because someone miscounted the days or posted late. So if you, for example, if you sent us it on the 6th, the Friday, so your day won't start publishing until the 1st of the 7th on that Saturday. So it's just kind of one behind. So step 8 is obtaining environmental clearance. So once the objection period is over with no issues and no one had any comments on anything, DED, so Ryan and I will issue your authority to use grant funds, or the AUGF. And so this is your formal green light to begin any work that you have. Next, special circumstances is updating the environmental review record. So if your project changes significantly, you kind of update any details to anything. So you may, you add a new site or you find something unexpected, you may need to amend your environmental review record or even complete a new review. So if you're, most likely it's just going to be the first 4 pages of our amendment packet. But with our new kind of process that we're doing, we want to make sure that any change orders you guys are bringing in that have any issues with the description. So say you're using you said you were going to use like this many pipes for this, and then you decided that you need more or you need less. We need to know that in the environmental review record, just so that whenever HUD comes and audits, we see that we have those, we have that change in the record, that it's still in your project scope and it's still within your location.